One Last Hurrah by Madison McSweeney. Grave robbing I'll confess to. Murder and battery I will not. I'm no killer. There's no law in the books that condemns a man to the gallows for assaulting someone who's already dead. I could say I did what I did for science, but I won't insult you. I did what I did out of greed. Your Honor, you're no stranger to me. You know that I come from a good family and that I disgraced them through vice and gambling. You may be tempted to view this as further evidence of my character, but I would implore you to have some pity. I believed at the time that this was a victimless crime. We all know the city of Kingston has no shortage of corpses whom none would miss, buried shallowly, all waiting for some productive purpose. My partner in these endeavors was Mortimer Masters, the undertaker's son. I don't know what circumstances led him to dishonor his family and their noble occupation, though I can understand why he denies involvement now. It was he who let me into the graveyard at dusk, opening the iron gates with a set of rusted keys, and pointed me to the freshest graves where the soil was soft. The difficult part was hauling the corpses out of their graves. Amateurs though we were, we devised a network of ropes and pulleys to ease the task. We upturned 4 graves. I maintained my composure for the first 3, regarding the bodies as nothing but discarded medical waste. The illusion was dispelled when I found I knew the final corpse. Alan Lafreniere, a Frenchman who was once engaged to my wife. I did not have a friendly history with the man, though I didn't rejoice at his death. I asked Mort, well, I was feeling a little queasy. I asked Mort to lift him into the carriage himself. The sky was blue-black by the time we finished loading the cadavers. But we had made good time. I expressed to Mortimer the sentiment that we might make our delivery and be back in time for a drink before the pubs closed. Our customer was a medical student at Queen's University. You may ask his name, but I won't give it. Other than financing us, he had no part in this and does not deserve to be caught up in it now. In any case, we never reached him. A block from the cemetery, Mortimer realized that his wristwatch was gone. Oh, he was in a state. The watch was a family heirloom, and past and future generations would be bereft at its loss. Moreover, his father would recognize it if he found it on the grounds, and our night enterprise would be shut down. Not that either of us had any desire to stay in this business, Your Honor. I agreed to help him search, securing my horse before heading back to the cemetery. The streets were clear, and we had no reason to believe that anyone would disturb the carriage and uncover our grim cargo. After nearly an hour of frantic searching, Mort concluded that the watch must have fallen off and been buried in one of the refilled graves. His solution was to dig them back up and sift through the dirt. After we failed to come to an agreement about a reduced rate for not finishing the job, I turned my back and exited the graveyard gates. When I returned to the carriage, it was empty. But I won't bore you with an account of every street I rushed up and down, every door I knocked on, asking frightful questions. Suffice to say, after a fruitless search, I became so disheartened that I found myself drawn, as if by a siren's call, to the nearest bar. When I stepped into the Royal Tavern on Princess Street, the bartender looked at me with contempt. "Come to pay your tab, eh?" he asked, washing out a mug. Why, I asked the man what he meant. I was not unknown at the Royal, but I hadn't drunk there for some time and was sure I'd never skipped out on a bill. He told me that a motley gang of 4 reprobates had staggered in an hour before, drunk like sailors, and told him to put it on my tab. "Stink up the place," he added. Now, I assured him that I would never consent to such a thing, which led the honorable barkeep to threaten grievous injury to my person, giving me no choice but to transfer the contents of my wallet into his sticky palm. I then asked... Oh, Jesus. I then asked him sarcastically if he knew what fine establishment the delinquents had decided to patronize next. "They said they were going to the Queen's Inn," he told me. I was out the door in a flash, all but forgetting my horse and carriage as I scurried across the cobbles, flinching from the judgmental glare of the cathedral. Well, I had no idea who the gang could be, but I suspected that they had something to do with the disappearance of the corpses and feared that this was some elaborate scheme to blackmail me. Now, the Queen's Inn was a 10-minute walk, but I made it in less. They were gone by the time I arrived, but the staff, who were off-put as the men had stiffed them, directed me to the next location in their pub crawl, the Kingston Brewing Company. I fled before I could be seconded as a dishwasher. I entered the brew company to find 3 of the corpses sitting at the bar. Oh, these men moved and spoke, but they were not alive, Your Honor. Inadvertent burials of the living do happen, as you know. I believe you heard one such case last spring, where a man pounded on his coffin lid so loudly that he was dug back up, only to accuse his wife, his doctor, and the gravedigger of attempted murder. But, well, even if these 3 men had been alive when they were declared dead, the embalming process would have killed them, not to mention the hours without air spent underground. Well, I could only conclude that our immoral act of removing them from their resting places had restored to them an unnatural semblance of life. They cheered as I walked in, raising their glasses. Evidently, they expect me to pay for this round as well. Oh, they were a foul crew, Your Honor. Although they were only in the early stages of decay, their movements were jerky and abrupt. Each lift of a mug sent beer flying over the sides, and the liquid that passed through their sewn shut and ripped apart again lips dribbled through the torn thread holes and down their fancy shirts. In their funeral attire, all three were wildly overdressed. The proprietor's two burly sons descended upon the dead men. Evidently, their scheme to drink and dash had been sniffed out, and the owners here didn't believe a benevolent angel investor was on the way to settle up. The eldest and largest of the brothers grabbed one of the corpses by the shoulder and then drew back in revulsion. The corpse then lifted his mug and swung it towards the assailant's face. Well, you've heard about the bar fight that ensued. I won't relive it. The salient fact is that the corpse who incited the brawl was knocked out cold, and I took advantage of the chaos to drag him out of the bar and back to the cemetery. I found Mortimer there, still diligently digging, and left our friend with him to be reinterred. I did not risk re-entering the brew company, but a quick walk by indicated that the fighting was over and the troublemakers had left. I guessed they had gone to the Prince George Hotel, the next pub along the route. Now, as you know, several witnesses testified that they saw me along the bar of the Prince George drinking with two sickly men. Now, I'm glad to have the opportunity to explain myself. You see, Your Honor, I joined the corpses to convince them to return to their graves. But once it became apparent that the dead men would not willingly return to the underworld, I decided that my only option was to get them drunk to the point of compliance. Well, they were far enough on that road already, and I figured after a few more rounds they'd be suggestible enough to follow me back to the cemetery and pass out in their coffins. If I may, Your Honor, I resent the implication that I was out gallivanting with the rogues who had started the melee of the brew company and who would go on to bite several pedestrians in a mad rampage. Yeah, they behaved abominably in the Prince George, slapping the waitresses' asses and challenging the men to fistfights. Under the circumstances, you can't begrudge me indulging in 2 or 3 drinks just to calm my nerves. So unhappy was I to be there, I found myself blurting out to no one in particular, "Well, at least that bastard Lafreniere isn't here." It was then that my blood ran cold. Where was the 4th cadaver? Slurred the corpse to my left. "Sorry, I had some score to settle." Well, it was my own turn to leave without paying. Now this is where the eyewitness accounts devolve into speculation. You've heard from many well-meaning, respectable people who saw me behaving erratically. Now, as I have mentioned, I was seen asking after a gang of 3 drunks who claimed to know me, and later observed drinking with them at the Prince George. And though I maintain my motives were more rational than they might have appeared, all this indeed happened. I did curse the memory of Lafreniere and storm him out of the Prince George soon after, but for an entirely different reason than observers assumed. Now, allow me to skip ahead so I may contrast rumor with truth. I was found an hour later in the bedroom of my fiancée, Alice Asper. Her window was smashed. Lafreniere was at my feet, unconscious. My hands were bloody. Alice was dead, strangled. From their survey of witnesses, the police inferred the following. After a night of heavy drinking, I'd stormed into my fiancée's home and found her in bed with her ex-lover. Perhaps it was one of my drinking companions who had seen them together, hence my cursing the Frenchman and leaving the bar. In this version of events, I killed Alice in a fit of passion and beat Lafreniere within an inch of his life. But this was not so! It's true that I found them together, but this was no lovers' reunion. Alice was white with fright, his hands around her throat as he shoved her violently against the wall. By the time I'd climbed through the broken window, the light left her eyes. All I could do was put the murderer down. Grabbing the candlestick off Alice's nightstand, I swung for the back of his head. He released Alice and I hit him again before he could turn. This one stunned him, and the third blow knocked him down. Fearing he would rise again, I continued beating him until he was certainly unconscious. And I hoped dead for good. Unfortunately, Lafreniere survived, if that's the proper word for it, to enter his vile lies into the record. But, Your Honor, his very appearance confirms my word over his. If you would only look, his skin is gray, and he can barely move with the seizing of his joints. These aren't the effects of a beating. My word, he's positively rotting. Can't you smell him? I'm sorry, Your Honor. I will compose myself. I realize I am putting you in a difficult position, asking you to believe a man is dead when he's sitting upright in this very courtroom. But please, in the name of all that's holy, check his left wrist. He'll have no pulse, and he's wearing Mort's